There is a drug dealer in your house, likely more than one, actually. What was once relegated to the dark web is now available across the internet and even infiltrated popular social media platforms. I'm Jodie Sweetin, and on this week's Awkward Conversations, we will help parents understand their kids' social media and ways that we can try and keep them safe from all of the countless ways that retail drug traffickers are targeting our children every day. And joining us in studio is Ed Ternan, a dedicated father who tragically lost his son to a counterfeit pill laced with fentanyl, a story that is all too common these days. And in the wake of this immense loss, he and his family founded Song for Charlie, which is a nonprofit that seeks to raise awareness of the dangers of counterfeit drugs available on the street and online. Ed, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our next guest is a distinguished figure in child health and development, Dr. Dimitri Christakis. He's the editor-in-chief of JAMA Pediatrics, a professor at the University of Washington, director of the Center for Child Health, Behavior and Development at Seattle Children's Research Institute, and the chief science officer for the Children and Screens Institute of Digital Media and Child Development. Welcome to the show, Dr. Christakis.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Today's story that we are talking about, today's episode, is a lot about social media, and I know we hear constantly about the dangers of social media with anxiety and with depression, but one of the things that children and young people are facing now is the ease and availability of pills and drugs online, and not only pills and drugs, but counterfeit pills and drugs. Ed, I would like to hear a little bit about your story about Charlie and about how all of this came together in such a tragedy for you.
Yeah, well, Mary and I lost Charlie, our youngest of three children, in May of 2020. And the story is that it was that time when COVID was just starting.
Yeah.
Charlie was a college senior, so a lot of college kids came home for spring break, and then the university said, "Don't come back."
Right.
So it was that time. So after living with us for a couple of months, Charlie went back up to campus for his last month of his college career, drove up north, had a back surgery, was complaining to his friends about his back hurting. And he'd been prescribed Percocet in the past for the back surgery, and he knew what that would do to him. So on a random Thursday night, he and a friend went online, and they found a dealer called a plug on Snapchat, and they arranged a deal where the guy sold them a couple of pills. And what we know is that Charlie, he was supposed to have a phone job interview at 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, and his friends talked to him at 3 o'clock that afternoon, and he was playing video games in his room waiting for the call. And he never took that call. So what we know is that sometime after 3 o'clock, but before 5 o'clock, he put one pill in his mouth that he was told was a Percocet, and he died, the doctors think, within about 15 minutes of taking that pill.
I'm so sorry for your loss. As we said, this is a story that is becoming more and more common, and it has happened to several friends of mine as well, other people that I know, people that I've met in recovery, and we don't often think of our kids and young people being able to just go online and order drugs as easy as it used to be to order pizza. But dealers are posting a lot of things on these various platforms, and most of the time they are talking about drugs, like you said, Percocet, things like that maybe have been prescribed or maybe are legitimate drugs, but most of the time these are counterfeit pills and made without any quality control, and there's no way to tell which pills might contain a lethal dose.
Yeah, well, Mary and I were struck right away about the fact that the counterfeit pills at the time of Charlie's death were kind of in the news a little bit in the area where he died. And the county medical examiner and the sheriff's department had warning bulletins up on their websites. And there were stories on page 6 of the newspaper. And Mary and I said to ourselves, you could put that information in those places for the next 10 years and Charlie and his friends would never see it, because that's not where kids go to get their information. So we actually started working very early with some of the social media platforms to turn the tables a little bit and say, let's put is twice as much awareness, drug education and awareness messaging on these platforms as the dealers are putting drug menus. And so we figured we'd go where they are and beat them at their own game. So we've been trying to go directly to kids as much as we can through social media to warn them that just like there's no real chicken in a nugget, there's no real Xanax on Snapchat. None. It's all fake these days.
Right.
Well, it's so smart to be meeting them where they're at. We know they're already on social media. Let's get this information to them where they're going to, access it most of all.
That's right. We got to go where they are and kind of relate to them in their language. And so it's a real labor of love for us because this is a preventable death, right? If these kids, they don't want fentanyl. They're asking for Xanax or Percocet or Oxy, and they're familiar with those substances. They think they know how to take them. They've had them from their wisdom teeth or whatever, but they're being deceived to death, basically, by being given fentanyl in the guise of a legitimate medication.
Right. Dr. Christakis, this is really your area of expertise and talking about social media and its impacts on young people. What are some signs and things that parents can look out for? How can they better educate themselves?
Sure. First of all, Ed, thank you for sharing your story. It's so tragic, and I imagine you're still in a lot of pain. I'm glad you're trying to make something good come of it.
Thank you, Doc.
I would say that you're doing the right thing, trying to get the messaging in the right place, but it also should be noted that there's more that could be done by the platforms themselves. We're all familiar with the algorithms that appear on our social media sites that are trying to sell us anything that we've looked for, right?
Right.
So it's the exact same algorithms that are being deployed by drug dealers to seek out potential clients.
Right. In 2021, there was actually a study by Recovery Village that said that 44.7% of respondents reported seeing illicit drugs for sale on social media platforms, and that nearly 20% of those aged 16 to 24 indicated they could easily buy illicit drugs on social media. It used to be that you had to worry about who your kids were hanging out with or who they were, if they weren't doing well in school or if they were, you'd see these things and they would be a little bit more aware to parents. But now, kids are on social media, and as much as we want to be involved and know what's going on, it's impossible to be all places at all times, and particularly when kids have become so adept at learning how to hide things and learning how to have fake apps and Finstas and, all of these things. I have 15 and almost 13-year-old daughters, and social media is both a great thing for them and has connected them to a lot of people, and it's also the bane of my existence for them.
Yeah, so of course it's really important that we do teach children how to be responsible on social media platforms. The same way we try to teach them to be responsible in the real world. I think the challenge, as you pointed out, is most parents aren't familiar with the social media platforms their children are using. But that's remediable. I mean, I think, the reason I'm on Facebook today is because my kids got on Facebook when they were 13. That's when I got on. I'm still on Facebook. They've left. They're on.
I was going to say they've probably left Facebook by now, right?
My Facebook is filled with old people like me. But, Ed and I think, are probably both from the era that we remember when cars were very unsafe. In fact, cars were sold without seatbelts. And even cars that had seatbelts, there was no requirement, no law that you use seatbelts.
You could drink and drive was legal.
Well,
so
that's
many
correct.
things.
There was no rules against drunk driving. And then when they had very high limits, much higher than today. So the truth of the matter is that parents need help. And we made laws that made cars safer. We put in speed limits to make cars slower. We put in drunk driving laws and then we enforce them. And there's absolutely no reason we can't do that for many of these things. I can assure you that that it would be a trivial endeavor, not only for these websites to track ads that they think are illegal and remove them, but to alert parents of children who are searching for such things. It obviously doesn't have to be law enforcement. It could be, in fact, a social worker. This is not should be treated as a crime. It should be treated as a dangerous situation that requires intervention. These things can all be done. It just takes political will to make them happen.
Right. And one of the things I find, relative. I mean, I'm 41, but my kids are 15 and almost 13. And sometimes words and slang and sentences will come out of their mouth, and I immediately am like, oh, I'm ancient. I have no idea what you just said. I don't know what that means. I don't know why you sent me that emoji. I don't know what these things mean. Where, have you found like any recurring emojis or words or things like that that maybe parents can keep an eye out for?
It's difficult because they're constantly changing.
Right.
And the kids will update it as soon as they suspect that you're onto them. But I do think personally that the parent engagement with the kids and having honest conversations about what's going on with social media is really, really important. And the doctor alluded to it. You have to treat your child's interactions and relationship with social media as you would any in real life, IRL, interaction. Right. This is where they are. All their social transactions and meetups and parties and everything are arranged there. So even beyond the drugs, making sure you understand how all these apps work.
Right.
And if your kid is on Discord, you have to have a Discord account, and you need to get familiar with that app. And I think it's important that your kid knows that you know, right? So just kind of being present and letting the kid know that this is not a place you can go and escape from your parents or your caregivers. Social media. You don't get to go over there and be by yourself and be doing things kind of like we used to behind the gym.
Right.
That we're there too, and we're kind of doing our best to keep up with you.
Right.
To me, that's important, the parental responsibility.
I actually followed my daughter one time. I found out that she had a, fake Instagram, and so I created an account that said "Mom knows," and I followed her and I commented on her picture, and I was like, "Hi," and that was it. I was like, I will find you. I will find you.
That's
and
right.
honestly, between things like that and Life 360, where it gives parents more availability and, to know where your kids are, or how they're in a car, how fast they're going, all of these sorts of things. They're so vital and so important.
Yeah, I would say you're not alone, Jodie. In all the sessions I have with the young people, daily, I'm like, oh my goodness, I am like ancient now. But I do know that the DEA also has a cheat sheet for parents on the different emojis and different codes, and so we'll post that in the show notes below. But to Ed's point, it's always changing, it's always evolving. Once they get a whisper of like, people know this, it's the new thing. So I think also try to use some, somewhat common sense. Like if you're finding these emojis that just don't make any sense to you, it might be benign, but just Google it. Like, what is blue jeans plus purple heart plus funny face, and the internet will probably guide you in a direction so that you're not kind of on your own with this.
Right.
I should also add though, that one of the relationship between mental health and drug use is complicated, and it's dyadic, but the other sort of causal role that social media plays isn't just the availability of drugs, but the precursor of activities that lead to it, including anxiety and depression, which clearly are caused by excessive social media use or inappropriate social media use. So, I think parents need to be, in general, attuned to warning signs in their children's behavior. If they're seeming particularly sullen, if they're aggressive, if their school performance changes, if they show less interest in going out with friends, all of those are warning signs that parents just need to take very seriously. We have a mental health crisis right now with our kids, and actually was made much worse by COVID. I don't know how Charlie and his siblings were affected by it, but my kids were affected by it, and many kids around the country, around the world for that matter, were affected by it.
My daughter was in 6th grade and middle school. Which is one of the hardest ages anyway. It was heartbreaking to watch her go through that and really struggle.
And depression begets drug use and drug abuse, and then drug abuse often, intentionally or unintentionally, leads to devastating consequences.
I know one of the things that is so important when having these conversations with our kids, and Ed and Dr. C, you've talked about this, is avoiding that judgment or moralizing or sort of shaming them into compliance. I know that we've found in study after study after study that does not work. It is not effective. It does not make your kids want to open up and come share things with you.
It does the opposite, yes.
Right. It does exactly the opposite. what are some ways that parents can, maybe have some of these conversations and ask some of the questions, where we don't seem old and out of touch, but where we seem genuinely concerned and trying to connect with our kids, and not, wagging our fingers and telling them, don't do this. Well, how do we have real conversations? And something that we talk about in every episode. But Ed, I'd love to hear how you have approached this.
And at Song for Charlie, where we are spending a lot of our energy trying to communicate directly with young people, we've consulted with a lot of experts like the doctors here and others. And what we've learned is a couple of things that were really light bulb moments for me. One is start with questions and come from a place of curiosity. There's some parallels to the fentanyl crisis and the fake pill issue with COVID, where there's actually an opening for parents and kids to say, hey, this is new. Let's learn about this together. And so starting the conversation with, what have you heard about this? I've heard about this thing. What are your friends saying? And welcome a dialogue. And I think that's really important. One of the really interesting kind of pro tips that we've been given is to appeal to young people's peer affinity and make it a concern for the well-being, a public health warning, for the well-being not just of them, but of their friends.
Right.
So our message is one that we think is very empowering. It's kind of like, look, this is not your fault, but like there's sharks in the water.
Right.
There's really scary stuff out there. This is new. You need to keep not just yourself, but your friends safe.
Right.
You don't want this to happen to anyone you know. So tell your friends, learn up about this stuff, Google, study,
Right.
figure out what's going on, and protect each other.
Right.
And we think that resonates with young people.
We'll be right back after this message.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
I also make it a point to tell my kids that anything that they come and bring to me and ask questions about is I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to scream. It's not going to become a fight. If you are coming to me and asking a genuine question or coming to me and sharing a concern about a friend who maybe is engaging in risky behavior or substance abuse, I'm not going to sit there and you can never see them again. And this is because immediately I remember my parents doing that, and it was like, well, now they're my best friend. Now we're on a team, and no one understands. And my kids know if you or any of your friends are struggling, if your friends want to come talk to me, I'm here. I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to say that they're bad people. And I also really work to reinforce the idea of addiction and substance use as a mental illness, as a disease, as a problem, that it's not your friends aren't bad people. They're not dumb. They're, all of those things that I think we often want to, demonize addicts and those who are using substances. Instead, coming to our children and saying, oh man, it must be so hard to be a young person right now. Like, I can't imagine what you have to go through and what the stress is on you. Like, how do you feel? Yeah. And I've found some of the most beautiful conversations that I've had with my kids have been coming to them and being like, man, it's gotta be hard. It's gotta be hard for you. Is it rough? And they will be like, oh, you don't even know. And you're like, okay. And also I always call it the mom face, which I believe Michelle Obama had talked about one time, about having that face where your children might tell you shocking information or something that is surprising that you didn't know. And being able to take in that information with a deep breath and continue the conversation, or say, give me a minute for a sec. I'm gonna and let them know that it is not the shutting of the door, because kids are so ready for parents to. We're not going to talk about this. This is. We're not even having a conversation. And once we stop having conversations and stop asking questions, we lose any ability to really have that connection with our kids. How, Dr. C, how can parents teach their kids about the responsible use of social media. I know it's a conversation I have in my house all the time. Like, yes, I know you're talking to your friends, but also, hours and hours and hours on Snapchat scrolling through. I know it doesn't make me feel good. It can't possibly be making you feel good. How do you have these, conversations and teach your kids about reasonable social media use? Because outright barring it is also probably not a solution for most people.
Yeah, I mean, since we're talking about the popular media use today, it's really TikTok, right, which is dominating. And TikTok is a platform that was built to be addictive. In fact, it has the most addictive algorithms of all of the social media sites. We teach them not to drink until they're legal. And then we teach them that, this is an addictive and potentially dangerous substance, that if you're going to do it, you have to do it in moderation. That's the conversation you have to have with your children. If they're going to be on TikTok, they have to know that they're treating it as an addictive, it's an addictive substance, it's an addictive platform, and they need to know when enough is enough and when to walk away. And that conversation is, how much time do they want to spend on TikTok? They need to literally have that conversation with themselves and with you. And the truth is, Pew did a survey a few years ago. 35 to 50% of adolescents are concerned themselves about their overuse of social media. It's not as if teens don't recognize that they are potentially having a problem.
I'm concerned about mine. I realize, and parents modeling that behavior is so hard.
Absolutely. So that's the other thing I was going to say. It's really important to model it. And the benefit of being on a platform with them is that they can see what you post, which admittedly is going to look stupid, but they'll see how you react to other people's posts, and they'll see how often you use it, which hopefully will be in moderation. I think these are these are sort of modern social skills that none of us learned as children. Certainly I did not.
Right.
And we're having to now learn on the fly.
Along with that is the development and change in what social relationships are, and that, like you said, these social relationships that these kids that they're spending, oftentimes online with, kids they go to school with and things, we see it as not quote unquote real interaction and that parasocial relationship development, but so much of modern day relationships take place through technology and are enabled because of technology. And, we didn't have to deal with some of those things. Are there age appropriate limits and guidelines and things for social media?
One of the things that makes this very challenging for parents is, we tend to think, when we talk about media, we tend to be very monolithic in our thinking and lump everything together. So we talk about using your screens or being on your phone. The truth is, if kids are on their phone texting with their friends or FaceTiming with their friends, I wouldn't even count that as screen time. That's the time we used to spend talking on the phone.
Right.
That's one thing kids don't do now is talk on the phone. Teenagers, when I was spent hours on the phone talking.
They FaceTime now.
They FaceTime.
All on the FaceTime.
And I think that's great. I actually think it's progress. I think FaceTime is better.
It saved them during COVID. That having some of that interaction was key.
Right. But see, FaceTime is simulating it's a real relationship. Like I said, it's talking to someone and making the interaction realer because you can see their face, you can read their emotions. I think that, it's obviously second to an in-person meeting, but I think it's great. Social media sites are different. First of all, they're one-to-many exchanges and many-to-one, and they invariably involve very, very loose social networks. Most teenagers today have thousands of friends. By definition, these cannot be people that they have real-world relationships with. Nobody has that many friends at any age. So, one of the rules I have for my kids, or had, and it's one of the rules I have for myself, by the way, I never friend anybody that I've not met in real life. I don't have any friends that I only know of online, which for kids might mean that, yes, I met Joey at camp and now we're friends. That's fine. But when Joey's friends start friending you and you've never met them, those aren't friendships I would make.
I know privacy is also a huge concern because as kids are getting older, the teenagers spend a lot of time in their room. They always have. So balancing that idea of privacy and of, there are things that they are entitled to have to themselves, but also being involved and knowing what's going on. It is such a hard balance. It's like, oh, sometimes I want to go and read all of my kids' messages or all of their DMs and I'm like, oh, but that also feels really invasive, and I don't want them to think I don't trust them, even though maybe I don't always trust them because you shouldn't. But, finding that balance of allowing your children to have their own lives and have privacy, but also not being secretive. How do we do that?
Yeah. So first of all, I think children are entitled to privacy until such time as they raise enough suspicions that parents have a duty to invade it. But the other thing I want to say about these difficult conversations is that there's an adage in pediatrics anyway that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The truth is most parents put off having these difficult conversations until it's way too late. You should be talking to your children about drugs, about sex, about drinking well before you think they will. In my practice as a pediatrician, all the parents think, I don't have to have this conversation with my child now. There's no way they're doing that now. And that's really more about their own mental inability to foresee that their child will ever do those things.
Right.
You need to have them before. You need to start sowing the seeds about what represents healthy media use, non-drug use, or the risk associated with drugs, the very serious risks, well before your child has ever been around drugs, and then to continue to have that conversation and reinforce it.
Right. And it's always, safety before privacy.
Oh, without question. I mean, I think, when you think about these things, if something was to ever happen, like you're going to be probably kicking yourself or feel guilt that you didn't know more than you did. And I think, again, when I was growing up, like my mom and dad were privy to a lot more than parents are right now. And so, naturally, I got privacy when I moved out of the house. But like these are, kids are still in the house and, they need to be monitored.
Right.
And I think being upfront with your child about, I'm going to be monitoring these things. I'm going to, they're very smart. They find ways to hide things.
Right.
We don't know. But being upfront with them about this is how we function in this house. This is how I keep you safe. This is how you keep yourself safe. We're in it together. And I'm going to be, looking over these things to make sure that everything is okay.
Absolutely. And I found like things like social media contracts, phone contracts to be really helpful, and maybe not, they don't abide by it to the letter, but it opens up a conversation where I go, hey,
absolutely.
You're going to have a phone or a device or whatever. Here are the things that we've covered. If this happens, if you change the lock code, if I can't get into it, if I ask to see it and you don't hand it over or whatever, that's it. And now it's mine for a little while till we can have that open relationship.
I would be a little bit, I agree with everything you said. I'm a huge fan of smartphone contracts. I would treat it like the car though. The phone is yours and
Exactly.
you get to use it. It's not
Right.
their phone. It's your phone.
Right.
They get to use it as long as they abide by the rules. And if they violate the rules, they lose access. The same way they lose access to the car.
I can sort of tying that into what Dr. Dimitri was saying about, having only friending people who you actually know in real life, because sometimes dealers are not in your teens' close friend groups.
That's right. And again, treating the social media world like the real world, you want to know who your kids are hanging out with. So if you find out through any means that your child is communicating with someone online or on social media who you don't know who that person is, you need to ask that question, because the dealer is very often a friend of a friend, or someone who's connected through someone else.
Right.
And so you likely know who your kids are hanging around with if they come over and they're hanging out in the garage or in the backyard or something. You see you would come outside and say, I don't know this person. Who are you? Let's shake hands. Let me, what's your name? Right? You kind of have to take that same tack on social media. Make sure you know who your kids are interacting with on social media.
I mean, I think about that all the time. My kids I know who my kids are friends with, who they come into the house with, but those people that are quote unquote in their social media are in the house as well.
Good way to look at it, right?
You know,
right.
and I will fully admit I do my best with my kids' social media. So any parent out there that's listening that is like, I don't do it at all, I'm terrible at this. It's never, we say this all the time, it's never too late, it's never too early. You can always start over, you can always reevaluate, you can always change the rules. You can, and I tell my kids that all the time. I go, sometimes as a parent, I'm going to make one rule and then I'm going to realize that's not working out so well. And I get the ability to change it. And when you're a parent and you have your own house, you can change the rules. And I try not to do it often because consistency is key. But sometimes you find like, oh, you know what? I thought you were ready to handle this amount of freedom. You know what? We're just not quite there yet. So we're going to pull back and we're going to try this at a later date. And I'd love to hear, more about how people can support Songs for Charlie and what that organization is about.
Yeah, songforcharlie.org is our website. We have resources there for kids and also for parents and families. Our core belief is that we need to change the way we talk about drugs in America, especially
Absolutely.
with this new chemical drug landscape and the counterfeiting that's going on. We think the conversation needs to happen earlier. If you think about it, the counterfeiting of supposedly legitimate medications and selling unregulated, highly potent and like uncontrollable dosage-wise substances, illegal substances, and selling them as supposedly legitimate meds, we blurred the lines between drugs and medications, right? So it's never too early to talk to kids in 8, 10, 12 years old to say, your sister's getting some cough syrup today. She has a sore throat. When she's feeling better, she stops getting the cough syrup. And you don't get any because you're not sick. Right. And really start to educate the kids about what they're putting in, how it affects their bodies, and how they need to be smart about that. So we put a spin on the old slogan. We still say just say no, but we spell it KNOW.
Yes.
We think knowledge is what's going to, protect these kids and equip them to make better decisions. And that conversation needs to start around the kitchen table, we think.
Absolutely. Because, like you said, that this line has now been blurred with legitimate medication and, even pharmacies in other countries, they're now finding it's all fake medication. All of the pills are counterfeit, and almost all, I would say 99.99%, probably all of the pills online are fake. What the DEA has told us and what so many people report is that everything purchased online outside of a regulated and legal pharmacy is going to be counterfeit, and you cannot know what's possibly in it. The DEA, we had a chemist on earlier who said, I can't tell you by looking at it. So your dealer is not going to be like, oh no, that one's okay. You really, really don't know. Ed, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your story. And I thank you so much for continuing to use a story of such tragedy and such loss to help others. As a mom, my heart goes out to you, and
Thank you.
I thank you for the work you're doing, because it is going to make a difference. And talking about substances and staying in the KNOW and not just the NO is super, super important. Amy, thank you so much again for another wonderful episode.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Awkward Conversations. I really appreciate it. And remember, keep talking, keep listening, and keep having those conversations. We are out of time, everyone, but please join us next week for another Awkward Conversation. The drug talk. So, have you had it yet? How'd it go? Maybe you were caught off guard, but don't worry, you can come back from it. Or are you putting it off because you're scared, or maybe you just don't know how to start? If so, we've got you. And if you've had it, we're here to tell you it's not just one talk. Sorry, it's a lot.
More than the talk, what's been effective in our family is the listen.
So all of these things that we're talking about is like that immediate parental response is like, I will kill you. But I think what this is opening up and what needs to be talked about more is, how are you going to respond if someone says, yeah, I'm probably going to try it?
Kids, especially teenagers, don't want to feel like they're being interrogated. You would never lead in with, are you using drugs? You'd lead in with, so I hear, in the media, a lot of kids are using fentanyl. What do you feel about that? It's an open-ended question.
Like, don't let your kids know, okay, we're going to have this talk at 7 o'clock, kind of thing. It's more of a, hey, you're playing a game, exactly what Greg said. Hey, I read this thing about marijuana. What do you think about it?
Make sure to check out getsmartaboutdrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.